So in this lesson, we're gonna take those modified spheres and we're gonna add texture, and we're gonna do a little bit of a blur as well, just to give it some more depth of field. So we'll get started, and let's go ahead and jump in on adding texture. So I'm gonna do fuzzy and rock, two different ones. I'm gonna start with the fuzzy sphere. So I'm gonna add a new layer here, and then gonna get rid of this specular highlight. And then I'm gonna soften some of these edges here. Just gonna kind of soften some of these little parts and also get rid of some of the reflective. I wanted to kind of dull down that cool ambient fill light and just soften everything all around. Wanted to light up the shadow underneath there because I'm kind of imagining this to be like a cotton candy almost, maybe, sort of texture. So just wanted to rough up like the variances of color and shadow. Now I'm gonna just adjust the edge. So a lot of times people will just take a texture and then trap it within that circle or whatever shape they're using. But what you want to do to really create the effect of real texture is that edge needs to also change. So in other words, you can't just keep a perfect circle and then add these like rough paint strokes on the inside. It's just not going to feel natural. What I'm doing here is just changing that edge to really feel like a rough kind of texture. And I said it kind of joking like candy, but I think I am going to kind of just go for that, like some sort of a fuzzy little ball. I'm just kind of going through, selecting around, and then adjusting that edge as I go. I want to still maintain the shadow areas, but I want to vary. So what I'm doing here is I'm kind of bringing in the shadow areas to overlap. The light areas, you see there how it's kind of overlapping a little bit. So I'm bringing it in and I'm not blending as smoothly. So this is where this rough brush comes into play and becomes very effective. I don't want everything to be blended so perfectly or so smoothly, because then I'm not going to get that texture. I'm not going to get that fuzzy kind of look that I'm going for. I had to speed this up just a little bit because this took me a while to paint, but I really wanted to share this with you guys. Here, I'm just adding in some more of that highlight. I felt like I lost some of it as I was adding the texture. I didn't want it to feel so much like a tennis ball. I wanted it to definitely feel more like something a little bit more organic. So then here, just dropping in drop shadow. I wanted it to kind of feel like it's floating a bit. I still have some of that cool light on the far right. In the shadow, you see it kind of getting a little lighter. It's real subtle, but it's a little lighter there. Picking up some of that gray color in the background and blending it in so that it creates the illusion of the shadow getting softer. As always, the closer that is to the actual object itself, the darker that shadow gets. Just wanted to blend that in, and I'm pretty happy with that. I think it looks pretty good. Maybe soften these edges just a little, maybe just blend a little here just to kind of again soften and fade that out a little bit. But yeah, I think that looks good. So now I'm gonna move on to this rock sphere. So I'm gonna transform this now to feel more like a rock. And so what I'm going to do here is I brought in this photographic image. I'm going to use this as my texture, so I label that layer as texture. I'm going to use the liquefy tool to warp this sphere. This is a really fun tool to quickly mold something into a shape that you want. So I wanted this to feel more like a rock. No rules here, just kind of having some fun with it and warping and stretching it. It looks, right now, it looks like a polished stone. Because I still have that specular highlight in there, but just focusing on the shape. I just want like some sort of a irregular shape. Again, no rhyme or reason, just kind of interesting shapes that rocks have. And so now getting rid of some of those highlights and adding some more rough planes to it. And again, keeping some of those hard edges because that's what gives the illusion of the actual material. If you look, you don't see as much of the rough little fuzzy paint strokes. I didn't leave as much of it in there. I blend in a lot more, or a bit more here than I did with the fuzzy ball, but I still am leaving a lot of those hard edges. Then now I'm gonna go ahead and just adjust the contrast of this texture, play a little bit with the brightness. I want to mute it down so it's not super high contrasty. And now I'm gonna drop it over, make sure that it fits and covers, and I'm gonna change it to soft light looks good. So you see the texture shows through, so I use that as a guide. I'll actually physically paint in. So I'm moving things around a little bit, and I think that looks pretty good. So I'm gonna lower this opacity. And I'll create a new layer, and now I'm gonna start painting in some of this detail. I'm still kind of creating my own little shapes, maybe making it feel a little bit more raised. So this is really just a guide to kind of draw and paint over on top of. And then you just kind of tweak and revise a little bit along the way. Remember, you want to keep in mind your occlusion. So those really, really dark parts, that's where you'll push. So I'm blending here to the right, but if you notice right immediate to the left, it's a hard edge and then a soft edge. Trying to recreate something that feels like a rock. And so this is a tricky part because there's no rules. I mean, rocks have all sorts of interesting shapes and crevices. Looking at the texture, if you notice, I did kind of lose that texture and turned it off and just deleted it because I feel like I just wanted to focus on just painting it myself from scratch. I had enough to kind of build and to get started, and now I just want to adjust that edge a little bit, slightly tweak the shape. I'm trying to make it feel a little bit more angular and just blend this in. It felt a little light. Keeping the bottom part dark because although the shape is very irregular shape, I'm having a lot of fun with that. The light setup is still the same. So the light should still match the fuzzy sphere on the left. Thinking about those planes that are facing down, those should be darker. And then up here, adding some cool light. These planes are facing up. And now I'm gonna push these highlights, this fill light, this cool light. I think I want to push it a little lighter. It shouldn't be as bright as my key light, which is the warm light on the left. I feel like it needed something, so this is just being a little nitpicky and rotating it a little bit. And now I'm just gonna add that shadow. So this one I'm not gonna have floating, but I do want it kind of just balancing almost. And so I'm just pulling colors from the other shadow, the shadow that I painted for the fuzzy. And again, just keeping my shadow lighter to the right and darker on the left side. And this, I do want to blend, but let's see, I'm gonna warp this a little bit. And I'm gonna blend this in. I think I want to add a little bit of blur to that shadow. Just felt a little too stark. Again, bump up the dark right on that very edge. Gonna change my brush to the softer brush. I want to darken up that. So what I did was I changed the mode of my actual brush. Now I'm gonna move this shadow just a bit. Go back to my hard edge brush. I just want to kind of tweak this a little bit. I wanted to tweak this edge a little bit. You see the way that kind of curves up? I feel like that contour should follow that edge, the edge of the rock. So I wanted to tweak this up here too, just a little. That feels a little bit more natural. It feels bumpy. You know, I feel like the outer edge of that rock should feel kind of bumpy. I feel like that makes it feel a little bit more natural. So just tweaking some of those little bits and pieces and a couple little details here and there. And now I just wanted to drop in another texture over on top of it. So this I will actually keep and use just to show you guys You can purchase a piece of texture like this. I'm going to drop it over, and then I do want to change this to overlay, and I'm going to trap that into the rock layer. And I'm going to lower the opacity down to about 18%. A combination of the painted texture with the photographic texture, keeping the photographic texture very, very subtle. And then I just kind of flattened it to make it all one. So I flattened the photographic texture. And now just adding some very, very subtle darkness to the little edges. And I think that looks pretty good. Okay, so now that we're done with textures and blur, remember, one of the big takeaways from this is that adding texture to the sphere, it shouldn't just stay within the shape itself, but we can also refine and change the edge of that simple geometry to really make it feel more lifelike. So now in this next lesson, we're going to go ahead and talk about mood board and importing your sketch.